Hi there, thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Alyce Weikel. I am an AP Access Spanish teacher in Cincinnati Public Schools. Today I'm just going to run you guys through active and hands-on activities in our current normal. So whether you are completely virtual in some sort of hybrid or blended learning situation, or if you are completely back in a hopefully socially distanced classroom. So the goal of this session is to provide you some ideas that you can hopefully incorporate next week to take traditional active and hands-on activities and perhaps transform them to be more current normal friendly. So I'm going to include some digital and in-person as well as socially distanced options. I will talk about what the traditional activity would look like and then some ways that we can make it just sort of changed a little bit to still be able to function in whatever classroom situation you're currently working with. Again, take what works for you, change it however you need to change it. I'd love to collaborate and hear how things work for you and what maybe some tweaks you made that were effective for your students. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to include some screenshots of different resources and also discuss some useful websites and things that you can use. A lot of these are things that you're going to be familiar with, certainly, but it doesn't hurt all of us to just have a little refresh on some of these items. So I'm going to start with two slides here on some quick hits. So trying to get our students moving and active and away from computer screens right now can be quite a challenge. We do need to, of course, maintain social distancing, those of us that are in the classroom in any way. So there are some ways that we can incorporate into our language learning, some just little active moments. So for instance, you could pose questions to the class and require some sort of active response. Typically, maybe a yes no question, a true false question, maybe choosing between two items, maybe the preterite past tense or the imperfect past tense if you're teaching Spanish. So you could have students give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, maybe have them stand up or sit down depending upon their response, just pointing a certain direction or to a certain place in the room, have them stand behind their desk or in front of their desk. Again, you can still maintain the distance that you need to, but have students just away from a screen for a moment, getting a little movement into their days. And again, you could also incorporate some movement breaks within your lesson plans. Simon Says is always classic. You can use your target language to reinforce body parts or actions or things you would like them to do. If you're teaching younger students, a little dance party, a little music break can go a long way. Older students, currently I'm teaching juniors and seniors, are probably not going to be super into that. If you are able to, you might be able to go outside and conduct your class activities outside. Maybe have students walk around, do those sorts of things just to get them moving a little bit. And again, anything we can do to just maybe break up the monotony of whatever is going on would be great. Some more quick hits are just some quick digital replacements. So I have long preferred to do some active and hands-on things within my classroom, and a lot of times that involves class sets of items, which is just not really a possibility right now. That also involves moving around, working in groups, sitting next to someone, standing in front of someone, whatever it may be, which is also just really not feasible right now. I also have spent a good chunk of my career working in districts and in classrooms without a great deal of technology. I am lucky now to be in a district that is one-to-one, and especially given our current climate and the need for virtual and hybrid learning, that's been great, but my wheelhouse is still teaching without those sorts of things. So I had to step back and sort of think about how can I transition from, say, having an individual student whiteboards. I can use a website like whiteboard.fi, which is a free resource. Students get a little whiteboard on their own screen. You can see all of the whiteboards on your teacher screen. You can also use items like the Show Your Work feature on GoFormative, which is one of the free features available, where you just sign up for a GoFormative account and create an assignment for students. I also use a lot of items with magnets and like putting them on the front board of the classroom. And again, shared magnets, shared papers, everybody up at the board, just not a thing we can do right now. So I've transitioned to a lot of drag and drop activities on Jamboard, on Google Slides, those sorts of things, so that students are doing the same sort of activity they would have been where they were perhaps putting a word in the correct part of a Venn diagram drawn on the whiteboard. They're now just dragging that into the correct part of the Venn diagram on a Google slide. Also, the traditional gallery walk, having students moving around the room, looking at different resources, answering questions, whatever it may be. Again, just not something we can be doing right now. So I've worked to replace that with a slideshow. So your gallery is now a slideshow gallery. I'm using multiple documents. So maybe one interactive PDF, a Bitmoji Classroom, something to that effect, where students can click on the different items and go to the different websites or authentic resources or whatever it may be that they would have been seeing through our gallery walk. And again, you can also just kind of give students a list of websites or a list of different documents and say, these are the things, had we been doing this traditionally, I would have put these different infographics around the classroom. Instead, here is a file with all of the infographics in them. And again, while not ideal and not getting students up and moving like we may want to, we can still replicate some of these learning experiences. So now that I've wrapped up these quick hits for you, I'm going to transition into 10 different active and hands-on activities. And again, based in what would be a traditional classroom without social distancing concerns, discussing what that looked like traditionally, and then now how we can reinforce that, rechange that to be something a little more friendly for our current normal. So our featured activities. The first one is a game that I call Box of Lies because that is the name of the game that Jimmy Fallon plays on his late night show. On that show, and again, you can check on YouTube, there's a lot of great clips. I often use the clip of the beginning of his game with Adele just to kind of demonstrate how the game works the first time I introduce it. Students are given odd pictures and they work in either teams of like one versus one, so they're in partnerships, or you could do team against team. And students decide whether they want to describe the picture exactly as it is or they want to create a lie about the picture. So they're using the target language, and again, they can use words and phrases. They can move all the way to sentences, just depending upon their proficiency levels and their comfort with the item in front of them. So they describe the picture, and then the other team or their partner across from them has to decide, are they telling the truth or are they lying? And if they guess correctly, then the guesser gets a point. If they guess incorrectly, then the speaker gets a point. This is great because students can really play to their own strengths. So if they're given a picture of something that they really have no idea how to describe, they can totally lie, make something up separate completely, and then use the vocabulary that they are comfortable with. So traditionally, when I would play this game, I would put all of the pictures up on the front of the classroom, have them numbered, and students would just take a picture one at a time as they were playing. So we were all sharing the same resources, and it just kind of cut down on needing to have multiple copies of the pictures. In our current normal, one option could be to print out multiple copies of the pictures if you have that resource. I, this year, have actually been using the technology at our disposal and just created 2 different Google Docs, and I share one Google Doc with one set of students and then the other with the other set of students so that they don't have the same pictures. So if you're playing one-on-one, student A would have the A document, student B would have the B, or if you were doing groups, then the group A would have the same document and group B would have the same document. And again, you can still have students keeping social distancing. They can speak to one another. Most recently, when I played this with my students, I sort of served as an intermediary and kind of stood between them. Students don't always want to speak loud enough to be heard at social distancing with masks on. So I could also repeat what the students had said. I could build upon it. I could reframe it. I could circle. So all these sorts of things to continue to keep the input comprehensible, but reinforcing the Spanish that students were using. So here I just have a picture of actually the most recent document that we use. My students right now in Spanish 3 are reviewing the past tense and working with items such as legend vocabulary, fairy tale vocabulary. So one of our words was volcano. So as you can see here, I found this very odd picture of a gentleman deciding that playing a guitar in front of a volcano was the best choice. So as a student, I could look at that picture and describe it exactly as is, or I could change it slightly. So perhaps I could say he is playing the piano in front of a volcano, or he's playing a guitar in front of the ocean, small changes like that. Or if I just want to be completely different and just make something completely strange up to try to convince the person playing against me that I'm telling the truth, I could say something random like there's a dog eating a slice of pizza, right? Using vocabulary that students are comfortable with. So the document I typically share with my students, and again, if we play this traditionally, I still give them some scaffolded vocab. You'll see here directions in both languages, and then some useful vocabulary. So there are words here pulled from the pictures that are actually in the slides or in the 2 documents for people, and then some additional items. So for instance, some of the pictures in this most recent set, there was a frog and there was a cow and there was a sheep. But I added in a couple other animals, right, just to sort of mix up so that students could use those as they were crafting lies if they wanted to. I've also given them some ideas for how they could change slightly if they're working on trying to lie but convince the person they're playing against that they're telling the truth. And then some level ups as well. So as I said, we're currently working on the past tense. So one of the level ups would be, can you work in the past tense? So instead of saying the man is playing the guitar, could you say played the guitar or was playing, just to sort of mix in a little bit. And then again, you have a collection of strange photos. Finding the photos is pretty easy, especially if you have a set of vocab you're working with. Google's an amazing thing. So if you just type in weird picture and whatever it is, you're going to find all sorts of things. Again, I typically like to give the students the pictures because if you set them loose on the internet, goodness knows what they'll find as they're trying to find those pictures. But this ends up being a lot of fun. It's a fair amount of prep for you on the front end, just copying and pasting and finding some pictures. But students really get into it and they'll actually use a lot of the target language without realizing that they're speaking so much of the target language without feeling like it's a burden. Especially if you emphasize to them that they can totally make up something and don't have to feel like they're compelled to exactly describe the picture. And they'll get really creative and try to make just small little changes to the picture. So they're barely lying to try to convince the person. They'll also really sell the lie. And again, if you go to YouTube and look for clips from Jimmy Fallon's late night show of different celebrities playing this, you'll see that a lot of this game is all about selling it, and students really get into it. And again, it's a way to get students like active, moving around. Sometimes they'll act out what the item is. They're not writing, right? They're not staring at a screen, so they're active. They're getting a little more involved and a little more hands-on. Again, with our new normal, with our current normal, in this case, I have been sharing the pictures on the screen, so they're looking at the screen for a few moments, but then they're interacting with their classmates. Our second activity is taking the idea of a walk and talk. So again, this is pretty standard, walking around, typically asking questions, interviewing someone, whatever it may be, talking to a variety of different people. Traditionally, of course, you would have more free movement. You could talk to multiple people. In our current normal, if you are strictly virtual or have some sort of hybrid going on, breakout rooms are great for this. It's also in a classroom. You can do smaller groups, stay distant. So instead of students talking to maybe half of their classmates, maybe they only talk to one or two. And instead of asking one question to multiple people, they ask two or three questions to just two or three people. So it's taking the same sort of activity, but just keeping those social distance sort of things in mind. Our third activity, I love to do a lot of cut and paste activities. Again, right now I'm teaching upper level students, juniors and seniors, and even they like to sort of rearrange things. They don't want to constantly be writing or typing. So again, there's lots of uses. You could have them build sentences. You could have them complete pieces of a picture based on a description. It's really good for emphasizing word order or agreement and that sort of thing. So if there's only a certain number of pieces to make a correct sentence, or you have, 80 pieces to make 8 sentences. How can you use all the pieces, whatever it may be? Traditionally, this would be scissors and glue. You could either give students the pieces pre-cut if you wanted to put in all the front end work, or you could have students cut out the pieces. You could still do this in our current normal if students have their own scissors and glue, or if you want to provide those for students. Also, if you pre-cut the pieces and provide them to students, and perhaps they have their own glue, then at least you're getting a little bit you're getting a bit away from shared class sets, which is just really not feasible right now. As far as doing this digitally, the drag and drop feature in Google Slides or Jamboard is super great, just dragging text boxes around, moving things to different places. I've got a few examples for this as well. On the bottom left, this is an activity from my Spanish 3 this winter. We watched 2 different holiday ads in Spanish, and then we have a Venn diagram here, and I had students drag the pieces to the correct spot. So rather than having them type everything out, write everything out, they could literally just drag the pieces to where they needed to be. This could have also been done just as a standard cut and paste, where they cut the pieces out and place them in the correct spot as well. In this case, the green box there, students were to type in their own additional sentence. So they could decide where it belonged in the Venn diagram. So you're still having students produce. So they're reading, there's some reading comprehension, right? They're showing that they understood the 2 videos you watched by placing in the correct area of the Venn diagram, and then they're producing their own output in the green piece. On the right, this is an activity from a few years ago in Spanish 4, where students were given this paper that has sentences with words missing, and then they were given a separate paper with verb forms. And you'll notice that in some cases there was a piece they could cut out and place in the blank, and then there were some items that they had to go through and figure out what the verb would be. So they could go through, use the pieces that were given, and then come back and figure out which ones needed to be filled in. So again, just a lot of interaction with the language, rereading those sentences a lot, and I'm working on the verb subject agreements. Some other additional possibilities here is an example for a German class, labeling the parts of a bike. So you could just drag the different pieces to where they belong. Again, this is from an Enchanted Learning website, a free website available that students could just print it out, cut and paste. So you could, again, provide the information, provide the paper and items for students in class, or Again, if you're trying to be a little more responsible with social distancing and not sharing materials, you could paste this into a Google slide and then have them drag and drop text boxes to label the different pieces. And then again on the left, this is the Spanish royal family tree, and students would complete the different pieces of the family tree based upon a viewing of a video that goes through the 3 generations of the family, the royal family of Spain. In past years, I would typically do this as a cut and paste item so that students could kind of rearrange the pieces as they worked and get everything laid out where they believe it went before they glued. So when students are writing, right, then they're having to erase and come back, and it's kind of a pain. Whereas if they have the pieces they can just manipulate and move around, it really helps them as far as being able to make quick changes. And again, they can do that here as well. You could create boxes where they drag and drop the names. In this case, this sample, they're just typing the names. But again, you could create name boxes where they would drag and drop them as well. Our next activity, hands-on verb conjugation. The concept is that students are given infinitives and verb endings for whatever tense you may be working on. And then the teacher can give an English translation. So I might say, I drink. I might give them a sentence to complete in the target language. So I might say like, yo blank agua. And students would have to come up with I drink to fill in that sentence. Or you could just step back and give them the infinitive and the subject. So I'd like you guys to show me the yo form of beber in the present tense. And students would use the infinitive, cover up the infinitive ending with the correct ending to match the subject. Traditionally, again, this is a paper activity, so hands-on. Usually I have a class set of verbs and endings, and we can use them for the present tense, and then I switch out the endings when we move to the past tense or to the future tense and so forth. You can have students cut out and make their own. So again, you could provide students with printouts of the infinitives and endings if they have their own scissors, or if you have scissors you want to sanitize, and have them create their own set that they could then keep. If you want to keep this more digital, again, you could use the drag and drop idea of Google Slides. So I'll show you an example here on the next slide how that could possibly work. And again, you could have students keep their own set of verbs and endings just to have that hands-on ability. Again, just depending upon what you have in your classroom. So here is 2 pictures of doing this in person. So hands-on, you have the verb beber on the right side, and the O form is what I asked for. So the students covered up the ER with the O, and you can see on the desk there the other endings. If you were doing this digitally, you have the yellow piece there, the infinitive, and then if I asked for the yo form, the student could grab the text box with the O and drop it to cover the ER there. Again, you could use color coding if you're doing this digitally, or if you're doing this with paper, you can color code those endings to match the subjects for reinforcement as well. So students are still working on their conjugations. You could have them completing sentences, but they're not just rotely writing conjugations or filling in a worksheet. Next item is related to that. This is now sentence pieces. So instead of just conjugating a verb or giving me one verb form, students can work together to create entire sentences, or they could have all the pieces themselves and simply lay them out on their desk. And again, traditionally, this would be words on paper, typically a class set. So I would have a set of what would create perhaps 5 sentences describing people's clothing. And I would say a sentence in English, like Lucy wears a yellow skirt. And people would bring up the different pieces of the sentence. They could put them on the board with magnets. They could just stand up and hold the pieces, those sorts of things. In our current normal, you could create single-use pieces and have students come up one at a time, perhaps by part of speech. So if I use that same sentence, Lucy wears a yellow skirt, I could say, all right, who has our subject? And then you're reinforcing, of course, your parts of speech as well, and students could come up one at a time. You could create sets for students to have on their own at their desk, so they're piecing together the little pieces on their desk, so as you could quickly walk through the room and see that everyone has that sentence built correctly. You can also go digital with this. You could use digital whiteboards to have students give the different pieces. So you could perhaps do rotations and say, okay, this group of students on this half of the room, you're going to give me the verb every time. And this half of students, you're going to give me all the nouns in the sentence, right? And then you could switch it. So together their whiteboards could create the sentence. You can also, again, go back to the drag and drop option in Google Slides and create text boxes so students can move the pieces around to create a full sentence. I did this with the future tense and had things color coded so students quickly caught on that all of the subjects are green, all of the verb forms are purple, and then all of the rest of the sentence is blue. So they wound up then with 6 sentences And then you had a column of green, a column of purple, a column of blue to help them kind of organize. And then from there, they could double check what their subject verb agreement looked like. Here are some examples of doing it on paper. So on the top there, students had different pieces around the room, and I would say a sentence. So like the top one says, he plays baseball as if his glove were his hand. So I would say that sentence in English. Students would come up, bring the pieces, build the sentence. On the right, this is much more for a novice classroom, practicing to love or to be enchanted by. So in this case, I would say she loves concerts. And so students would come up. These were color coded. So the first two parts are in yellow, dealing about the person. The last two parts are the action matching the thing that is pleasing or enchanting, in this case, to the subject. In the bottom left here, this is one way you could do this digitally, where you have a sentence. So yo tengo el libro grande, I have the big book. And if you're doing direct object pronouns, you can have students literally use the cross line feature on Google Slides to cross off the part that would disappear. Then they could grab the correct in direct object pronoun, and place it where it belongs in the sentence. So they could kind of wind up with yo lo tengo. So they could drop and really see which pieces are disappearing, how things move, that sort of thing. All right, moving along, one of my favorite activities that I've just not been able to do the last couple years is turning the classroom into a map. So literally turning your classroom into a town or a village or a city, however you want to describe it. Great for when you're doing vocabulary related to the city, great for when you're doing commands. You could label the streets on the floor, create blocks, place buildings and landmarks around the room, and then have students tour the classroom, follow directions, write their own directions going from place to place. I was able to do this 2 years ago now with my 8th grade students who were finishing Spanish 1, and it was a complete immersion day for them. So I was available as tourist assistants, but I only spoke Spanish. So if they needed to find something, they had to try to piece together some sort of phrase or set of words, something to be able to ask for the help they needed. Students had a little pamphlet with directions to follow from one point to another and a word to fill in. So if it said start at the school, walk 2 blocks, turn left on Calle Rus, and then what building's on the corner. So they would just kind of walk through there. They would create their own activity. So they literally were being able to use the language in a pseudo-authentic way. Again, traditionally, this is everybody up, walking around, everybody in each other's way. Not feasible right now. So for our current normal, you can use Google Maps. You can use the website Map Customizer, which I have a screenshot of here, where you as the teacher can actually drop different pins and have students, okay, how do I get from point 1 to point 2? Here I have the Atocha train station in Madrid, just as our example. And so you could literally have students like count the number of blocks to go from this place to this place, and still have them sort of walking, if you will. On Google Maps, you can use a street view option and have them actually like move along. So if you tell them, okay, you're going to start at this building, and again, you could use your own town, you could use a place in your target language culture. If you start at the Prado Museum and you turn left, what is the name of the next street you're going to cross? Those sorts of things, and really get students interacting with not only the language, but also the culture. And again, just a little more active, a little more involved. Again, not ideal. It's not super hands-on and active as it could be, but it's still something that's slightly different for them. Our next item is cooperative verb charts. Again, this is kind of a classic. A lot of teachers, of course, have gotten away from T charts and wrote grammar such as that. But for some students, it's really helpful to be able to see those patterns, to practice those patterns. So the group would start with a blank T chart. The teacher would provide the infinitive and the tense, and then the goal is to be the quickest group to complete, so you pass the paper. Again, having students sitting in rows, passing a paper back and forth, maybe sharing writing utensils, writing each other's business, not best right now. So for our current normal, you could do this on a shared Google Doc. So the team all has access to the same Google Doc, perhaps assign a color to each teammate. So that way you can see that, who completed what, whatever it may be. You can always use the look back feature to see, okay, did one person just complete this and change the colors? How did that work? You could use a slideshow. You could use a Jamboard. There's different ways you could do that. So here again, I have an example on the left of doing this on paper. You can see different handwritings, different pens being used. On the right then would be if they were in a Google Doc, color-coded, given the different forms. It's not ideal on a Google Doc necessarily because a lot of times it will autocorrect to your target language. So not necessarily ideal, but it's a start. It's something you can do. And again, maybe just a fun way to kick off class one day. You've been practicing a new tense, spend 5 minutes playing this game. Because again, not super communicative, not the greatest necessarily pedagogy right now, but something to get students involved, to kind of just use as a quick formative assessment and to get them active. Again, if you have them working in groups, you can have like maybe they have to stand up each time it's their turn if you're trying to just get some movement going in your classroom. Related to that one is board races. It's the same sort of idea where it's a team competition. This time you would be writing on the board. You could also be doing something like fly swatter game, those sorts of things on the board. Variations of board races, each student can either write a letter or erase a letter. You could do memory, so maybe the teacher reads a sentence out loud or a phrase or maybe just a word, and students have to be able to spell it. Traditionally, again, it's teams lined up, sharing markers, everybody, real close to one another, sharing the same whiteboard. With our current normal, if you're virtual or hybrid, you could use the chat feature of your Google Meet or your Zoom. So whoever can get the answer typed in correctly first would win, or you could use a shared Google Doc again for the board races. Again, it's all about customizing and tailoring it to what works for what you're working with in class and the type of students you have, how many students you have right now as well. The next sort of hands-on or active activity is categorization. Again, kind of self-explanatory. Traditionally, typically I have a class set of materials for whatever we're working with, and students would place the categories on the boards that we're creating a visual for the entire class. I could still do something similar to that if I had maybe one set use and then disinfected the magnets every time, but that's just not, right now the bandwidth I have is so low for things like that that I would rather move to some sort of digital option for our current normal. So there's some websites that you can use to replicate this idea. Flippity has the option for manipulatives, which you're going to see here on the next slide. GoFormative, the paid version or the 30-day free trial of the paid version, has a matching activity where you can actually have students move pieces around. So you can like move them to maybe just have the same category repeatedly. So maybe if you're categorizing by food or drink, you could have food 5 times, drink 5 times, and you have to slide the items to the correct category. You can again go back to the old Google Slides, drag and drop. You could have the title at the top, the 2 different categories, 3 different, whatever you're working with. Another item you could use is WordWall. WordWall will allow you to make 5 items total for free, and then you do have to pay. So WordWall has an item called Group Sort that actually embeds right into GoFormative as well, where you can have students drag and drop things, put them into the correct categories. So a couple examples here. On the left is more traditional, where we were working with the preterite and kind of categorizing what type of verbs, how verbs worked. That group of students I had that year really liked to see the patterns, like to see where things fit in. So creating those categories to kind of highlight for them where different verbs went, and then we could look at commonalities, like notice that a lot of these look like whatever it may be. This other picture here to the right is a screenshot from Flippity. This is from my current Spanish 3 class. We are working with the 2 past tenses, and so we created just this quick little Flippity where they have the 2 categories in the color, and then everything in the white needs to be dragged to the correct category. So you can have students practice on their own device, and then you can do a class one together. So I projected this item. We did a couple items to start, so like the 6 that I have categorized already, gave students some time to think, to move things around. You can drop a hint like there are X number under this category and Y number under that category. And then you can come back together as a class and get the rest of the items categorized on the screen that you're projecting. So you could call in specific students, you could just ask the class to help you out, whatever it may be. Our next activity is cards in the air. The concept is that students would hold up an answer, and again, this works really well when there's few choices. So similar to, like, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Plickers, which has the QR codes where you can have the 4 multiple choice items. You scan and can see who has chosen what, but other students can't see your choice. That's a great option for this. You could still use right now, again, you could print out students' versions and they would keep those instead of having a class set. More low tech, this is great. Like, you just give students 2 scraps of paper and have them write Sarah on one and a star on the other, and give them a sentence that uses to be and have them hold up which one it should be. Again, Plickers is an option for cards in the air in that it hides the students' answers from one another, so they can't just turn around and see that, oh, well, Bobby's holding up Sayer, so the correct answer must be Sayer. But Plickers does involve you providing the students a paper, and again, you could give them a copy and have them keep that and use it multiple times through the year. I have a class set of Plickers that I've used in the past, and I just haven't really decided that it was worth printing them out and giving them to students and relying on students to bring them back this year. So in our current normal, again, you could give students your own copies. I think what's been working for me really well this year is just the active responses, as I talked about early in this presentation. Thumbs up and thumbs down, maybe using sign language for the two letters of something. You can have them point to the front of the room, point to the back of the room, stand up, sit down, all of those things we previously talked about. Another great option is the Show Your Work feature in GoFormative, which again is part of the free GoFormative version. That's what I have here on the left. I set a sentence aloud for students for students in the classroom, and then I also have students virtually at the same time. So I say a sentence aloud for everyone to hear, both in the classroom and virtually, and then they just write on their Show Your Work, do you need por or do you need para? The two words for for. On the right side, this was a class set of por and para items. It's one stick with a hand. One side says por, one side says para. And so students could just hold up the different item. So you're getting them involved. They're providing you quick data, great formative assessments. They're being active, but you're not having them write something. They're not involved super much in a screen or whatever it may be. So just another great way to, again, get students involved in a little more active sort of way. So that was our 10th and final activity. So thank you so much for your time today. I know I'm a very fast talker, so if I can answer any questions, if you'd like to collaborate, discuss anything, whatever it may be, my email address is right here on the screen. And I'm also on Twitter at Alyce Weikel. Feel free to reach out if you have any ideas. If I can provide any help or suggestions, I would be glad to do so. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great rest of your day.